I used to think nothing could ruin the happiest day of my life. Not jealousy, not family drama, not even my sister's lifelong need to be the center of attention. I was wrong. Because on my wedding day, surrounded by white roses, candlelight, and over 300 guests, my own sister slipped something into my drink and smiled as I lifted the glass to my lips. I didn't know it then. I only knew that 10 minutes later, the room began to tilt, my vision blurred, and my knees buckled in front of everyone I loved. But let me start where the betrayal really began, long before the wedding, long before the champagne toast, back when my sister learned she would never be the favorite anymore. My name is Clara Whitmore, and for most of my life, I existed in my family as background noise. I was the responsible one, the quiet achiever, the daughter who didn't need praise because I didn't ask for it. My younger sister, Vanessa, on the other hand, was a storm, loud, dramatic, beautiful in the way that demanded attention. Growing up, everything bent around her moods. If she cried, my parents rushed. If I succeeded, it was expected. If she failed, it was a tragedy. That imbalance followed us into adulthood. I built my life slowly and deliberately. I worked my way through law school, paid off my debts, bought my own home, and stayed out of family conflicts whenever possible. Vanessa bounced from passion to passion, yoga instructor one year, lifestyle influencer the next, always chasing validation, always blaming someone else when things fell apart. By the time I met Ethan, the man who would become my husband, I had already learned not to expect support from my family. I just didn't expect sabotage. When Ethan proposed, I didn't tell anyone for 3 days, not because I wasn't happy, but because I wanted to savor a moment that didn't immediately belong to Vanessa. When I finally shared the news at a family dinner, my parents gasped, hugged me, congratulated us. Vanessa smiled too, but it was the tight, frozen kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "Oh," she said lightly, "a wedding. How exciting." From that moment on, everything changed. She criticized the venue, the dress, the guest list. She complained that my wedding date conflicted with her personal projects. She asked, no, demanded to be maid of honor, even though we hadn't been close in years. When I gently said I had already chosen my best friend from college, Vanessa laughed like I'd told a joke. "You'll regret that," she said. I should have listened. In the months leading up to the wedding, her behavior escalated. She made passive-aggressive comments during fittings. She accidentally shared my dress photos online before the ceremony. She flirted openly with Ethan's groomsmen. Every time I confronted her, she played innocent. "You're just stressed," she'd say. "Don't turn into a bridezilla." My parents told me to let it go. "She's just feeling left out," my mother said. "Be the bigger person." So I did. Over and over again. The wedding itself was everything I had dreamed of. A restored vineyard estate, soft string lights, long tables filled with laughter. For once, I felt like the center of my own life. I walked down the aisle with tears in my eyes, Ethan waiting at the end, and for a brief moment, the world felt safe. At the reception, Vanessa made a point of hovering near the bar. She insisted on helping the bartender, joking loudly, pouring shots for guests. I noticed she kept refilling my champagne glass whenever it dipped below half. "Hydration is important," she joked, clinking her glass against mine. I laughed. I trusted her. That was my mistake. The first sip tasted slightly bitter, but champagne can do that. The second sip made my tongue feel numb. By the third, my heart was racing. The room felt too bright, too loud. I remember gripping Ethan's arm and whispering that I didn't feel well. I remember Vanessa watching from across the room, her head tilted, her lips curved in a smile that felt wrong. Then I collapsed. The music stopped. Someone screamed. Ethan dropped to his knees beside me, shouting my name. I couldn't move. My limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. My chest tightened as if an invisible hand was squeezing my lungs. I heard voices, confused, distant. "She's fainting," someone said. "Too much champagne," another laughed nervously. Vanessa pushed forward. "She's always dramatic," she said, loudly. "She probably didn't eat enough." I wanted to scream. I couldn't even blink. An EMT in the crowd insisted on calling emergency services. When the paramedics arrived, they asked if I had taken anything. Vanessa answered for me. "No," she said quickly, "she doesn't do drugs. She's just overwhelmed." But something about my vitals alarmed them. They loaded me into an ambulance and rushed me to the ER while my wedding guests stood frozen in disbelief. The doctors worked fast. Blood tests, IV fluids, oxygen. I drifted in and out, catching fragments of conversation. Sedative. Dosage inconsistent with alcohol. Possible intentional ingestion. When I woke fully hours later, Ethan was sitting beside my hospital bed, his eyes red, his suit wrinkled and stained with dried champagne. "They found something," he said quietly, "in your blood." The toxicology report confirmed it, a fast-acting sedative commonly used to treat severe anxiety, dangerous when mixed with alcohol. Someone had spiked my drink. My wedding ring felt heavy on my finger as the truth settled. There were only 3 people who had been near my glass all night: the bartender, my best friend, and my sister. The police came the next morning. They asked questions, took statements. Vanessa cried convincingly when questioned, insisting I must have taken something accidentally. "I would never hurt my sister," she sobbed. "She's imagining things." My parents backed her. Of course they did. "She's under so much stress," my mother said. "Let's not ruin the family over speculation." But here's what Vanessa didn't know. The venue had cameras, and the bartender, quiet, observant, sober, had noticed she slipped something into my glass. As I lay there, in a hospital bed that should never have replaced a honeymoon suite, I made a decision. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg my family to believe me. I was going to preserve every piece of evidence. And when the time was right, I was going to make sure Vanessa paid for what she did, in front of everyone. Because she didn't just ruin my wedding, she nearly killed me. By the time I woke up, the ceiling above me was white and humming, the kind of sterile hospital white that feels louder than any sound. And the first thing I tasted was metal and regret. The second was the sharp sting of betrayal settling somewhere deep in my chest, because memory rushed back all at once. My wedding night, the raised glasses, my sister's smile stretched too tight as she insisted I drink first, the way the room tilted moments later, laughter echoing while my knees buckled, and how no one moved fast enough until strangers did. Nurses and paramedics who didn't share my blood but cared more about my life than my own family had in that moment. A doctor stood at my bedside, calm but grave, explaining that what had been found in my system wasn't alcohol, wasn't a reaction, wasn't an accident. It was a sedative mixed with a blood pressure medication, a combination that could have stopped my heart if the dose had been slightly higher. And as he spoke, I watched my husband's face crumble beside me, his hands shaking as he held mine, realizing that this wasn't a prank gone wrong or a drunken mistake. This was deliberate, calculated, and timed to humiliate me publicly before it killed me quietly. And when the doctor finished, he added one sentence that changed everything. We preserved the glass and sent it for forensic testing, because apparently someone, an ER nurse who saw the way my sister hovered, nervous instead of concerned, had thought ahead, and that evidence would become the thread that unraveled my sister's carefully curated life. The next days passed in a blur of IV drips, whispered conversations, and police questions, and every time my sister called, I let it go to voicemail, listening later as her tone shifted from fake concern to irritation to panic, because she knew something had gone wrong, not the plan, but the outcome. And when the toxicology report came back confirming the substances and linking them directly to a prescription in her name, the police paid her a visit, not in handcuffs yet, but with questions that made her neighbors stare. And suddenly the woman who loved being admired was being watched for the wrong reasons. What she didn't expect was that I wasn't interested in screaming matches or dramatic confrontations. I was interested in documentation, timelines, receipts, the way I'd always handled problems growing up in a family where I had to prove every truth twice. So from my hospital bed, I instructed my lawyer, yes, I had one because marrying into a family that owned businesses taught me to be prepared, to request the security footage from the venue, the bartender's statement, the guest list, and every text message my sister had sent in the weeks leading up to the wedding, including the one where she joked to a friend that I wouldn't even remember her own first dance, which stopped being funny when paired with chemical evidence. When I was discharged, thinner and weaker but very much alive, the story had already started leaking, not because I ran to social media, but because investigations have a way of speaking for themselves. And when people noticed that my sister was suddenly absent from family gatherings and her name appeared in a police blotter under questioning related to poisoning, whispers turned into headlines, and the family that once laughed while I collapsed now refused to answer calls from reporters. The formal charges came 2 weeks later: felony poisoning, reckless endangerment, and intent to cause bodily harm. And the look on my mother's face when she finally came to my house wasn't remorse, it was fear. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being asked to keep the peace, to be understanding, to not ruin everything. Instead, I handed her copies of the medical bills totaling more than most people make in a year and said calmly she will be paying for every cent, and something in my voice told her there would be no negotiations this time. My sister's lawyer tried the usual tactics, suggesting stress, jealousy, a misunderstanding, but the evidence was airtight, and when the venue released footage showing her slipping something into my glass while smiling at the crowd, the case shifted from family dispute to public outrage, especially when it came out that this happened at an $80,000 wedding funded partly by my parents, meaning they had unknowingly financed the event where their daughter nearly killed their other daughter, and that irony was not lost on the judge. The trial was mercifully short, not because justice is fast, but because guilt was undeniable. And when my sister stood to hear the verdict, she didn't look at me, she looked at the floor, as if staring at the truth might burn. And when the judge sentenced her to prison time, mandatory restitution, and a permanent restraining order, the room was silent. Not the dramatic silence of shock, but the hollow silence of consequences finally arriving. I thought that would be the end, but revenge doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers through paperwork, and weeks later my lawyer informed me that my sister's professional license, earned through a career built on trust and responsibility, had been suspended pending review because poisoning someone isn't a great look in any field that involves ethics, and the businesses she once bragged about investing in quietly removed her name from their boards, one by one like dominoes falling without an audience. My parents tried to mend things with apologies that came too late, offering money, therapy, family dinners, but healing doesn't happen where the wound was inflicted, so I declined gently and firmly, choosing instead to focus on rebuilding my life with the man who sat by my hospital bed every night, who never once asked me to forgive for the sake of comfort, who understood that love sometimes means letting the truth burn through everything false. Months later, when the final restitution check arrived, covering medical bills, legal fees, and damages, the envelope felt heavier than money. It felt like closure, and I deposited it without ceremony, using part of it to fund a small foundation that supports victims of poisoning and medical assault, because if my story could keep one person alive, it would matter. The last time I saw my sister was in a courtroom hallway as she was escorted out, her eyes finally meeting mine, searching for something, pity, forgiveness, a shared memory, but I offered her none, not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect, because the woman who laughed while I collapsed died that night too, and I was done carrying ghosts. Now, when people ask about my wedding, I tell them the truth. I almost died, but I lived. And in surviving, I learned something my family never taught me. Love doesn't excuse harm. Blood doesn't erase crime. And sometimes the strongest revenge isn't shouting or humiliation. It's standing upright, preserving the evidence, and billing the person who tried to end you for every breath you fought to take. Because in the end, she called it a joke, but the law called it a crime. And I call it the moment I finally chose myself.